just a man. Hey folks, welcome to the show. This is the next episode of You Are Not Aries, and if you're new to the show, as I explained before, that is the name of my Facebook group, and I try to bring you these shorter episodes in which I talk about some of the things that we discussed there. Now, for today, I'm going to discuss a little bit what we mentioned, and this needs a little bit of a backstory. So a while ago, after my MMA class, I was talking to my students, and the topic turned to an incident that happened here in my country several years ago, where this guy, a bodybuilder apparently, who was very much taking drugs, and he had this sort of manic episode, sorry. He was known to be violent then, and obviously being very strong. He was quite dangerous. Anyway, he was arrested. They put him in a holding cell, where he became frantic, and the police was ordered to subdue the guy so the doctor could give him some sort of injection to tranquilize him so he wouldn't hurt himself. That's in short the story. Now, there's a lot more to it than in tragedy, but that's not the point. The point is that when they entered, they used what is called a man catcher. Now, a man catcher was what one of my students objected to. He said that's just horrible. You don't do that to a human being. And we had this interesting discussion then afterwards, where the whole point was that two aspects. The first aspect is we all have limits as to how far we're willing to go. Now, I shouldn't say all, because some people actually, their limits are so far out that you probably won't even notice them, or they at least don't. So they're the sociopaths, the psychopaths of the world. So let's assume that you, the listener, are not in that category. So the idea is that we all have points where we typically don't go beyond. This is also discounting the notion that there are many circumstances in which you and I, anybody, can be pushed beyond those limits. That's also not the issue. The main issue is that we have limits, and the other issue is that it is rare when you watch real world violence that it looks pretty, quote unquote, meaning that it looks good. It doesn't look good. Violence tends to be messy, chaotic, and it rarely looks like, oh, okay, this is exactly the right level of force that is being used, and I am very comfortable with that. That is not the typical reaction most people have when they watch violence. They typically think it's over the top. Now, obviously, there are examples of this happening, and there are many, but the issue isn't that per se. The issue is that people have this perception of violence, real world violence, that they say that this goes too far, and they tend to say that very rapidly. Now, I'll get to that near the end of this episode. So I showed my students, like, look, okay, there's a system that I teach, basic self-defense, has two aspects, the soft and the hard version. Soft is controlling. That, doesn't need an explanation. The hard version is, quote unquote, neutralizing, meaning that where you control somebody, you want to make sure that you do minimum harm and you try to subdue them. There are many contexts in which this is applicable. The hard version of the system is all elbows and knee strikes, and some other stuff, but it's hard impacts, trying to knock somebody out and basically neutralize the threat immediately. Now, that is obviously, because of the impacts, is going to have a lot of potential for damaging and causing injuries to the person that you do it to. Again, there's also a context in which this is most applicable. So I showed this to my students. Look, watch this. Okay, and I'll show them an example of the hard version of that system. So look, it's all elbow to the back of the head, knee to the face, put the guy down, and so on. Then I showed them what is called the soft version, in which I grab you by the face, put my fingers in your eyes, not pushing them through, but so you reel back and so you flinch instinctively, and then take you down. And I explained to my students that, when you watch this, like I just did it to one of my other students, it looks horrible. And then I did it to the student who mentioned it, that he thought the man catcher was going way too far. So look, I'll do it to you. And I did it to him, and he went down. I said, "What do you feel? Pain?" "No, nothing. It looks horrible, but there is no physical injury involved the way I did it." So my point to him was that, okay, which one would you rather have? The one that looks really bad, putting my hand on your face, fingers in your eyes, and it looks like I'm gonna smash the back of your head to the ground. I didn't, but that's how the technique works. Or would you rather have the elbows and knee strikes that will break your nose, knock your teeth out, knock you unconscious, and so on? Which one? And that was kind of my point, in that, to bring across that idea of that violence doesn't look good. So we threw that in the Facebook group, and a lot of people responded with some really good answers to my question of, okay, what do you consider too far? There were a bunch of really good answers, and there's one that I actually want to highlight. And one of the group members said that he works in a zoo, and he mentions that when they have to care for the animals and or maybe give them medicine or something, and the animal resists, doesn't want that to happen, you're working with some pretty strong animals sometimes. So when they're grabbing that animal, even if it's a small one, doesn't matter, but they're grabbing it, it looks really, really bad to the public who watches that. The people who are taking their kid to the zoo to watch the animals, and then to them, it looks like just the caretaker just manhandling and abusing that animal and torturing it, because that animal might be fighting them, screaming, and so on, and it looks really, really bad. And the point is that it's not necessarily that they are hurting the animal, it's just that there's no way of making it look good, because the animal has sometimes a lot more power than the caretakers, but also what you'll see is that animals can resist. Now, if you think I'm exaggerating, what I'd like you to do is hold on to an adult cat. Doesn't have to be a big one. Hold on to an adult cat that doesn't want to be held. See what happens. You're going to get scratched up. It's going to claw at your face, and everything's going to bite. It's not going to be a fun ride for you. That's a small cat. Imagine what a wild animal or a bigger animal could do to you. And that's the point. It doesn't look good. Now, where does all this come together? Well, there's several points. My response to the example of the caretaker in the zoo was that what I tell people, I've been writing about this for years, and I'll put some links in the show notes where you can read that, where I said that anthropomorphism, so attributing human characteristics to animals, in this case, is a huge problem, because people tend to no longer have a really accurate understanding of just everything that is involved with wild animals or animals in general, meaning they take huge risks sometimes that they're not even aware that they're taking. The examples of tourists trying to take selfies with a bison in a natural park. It's like a huge animal that may or may not be impressed with you or decide that you're a danger. Here in my country, it happened in this nature park where you drive through with your car, and they all tell you don't get out of the car. And if I'm not mistaken, it was leopards. And it was filmed where you saw a family, husband and wife with small children, getting outside to get a closer look at the animals there. And the car behind them that was filming them, they didn't want to honk their horn to avoid escalating the whole thing. But you could see that the leopards were starting to show hunting behavior. So they were starting to hunt that family, most likely those small children. Now, if you've ever seen a leopard leap into action to get a prey, you know how fast this goes. That could have ended horribly. And that's the point. There's no way that I would get out of my car if I'm ever in such a nature park. There's a famous incident if I'm not mistaken, it was China, where same thing. there are all the signs, don't get out of the car. There's an argument in the car between a few other people, and one of the people gets out, and there's a tiger that just grabs, I think it was a woman, just grabs it and takes her off, and that's it. She's gone. When you are told repeatedly to do not get out of a car because it's dangerous, which part of you assumes that, oh no, they're exaggerating? It's going to be fine. I'll just get out of the car real quick and it's going to be fine. It's all exaggerated. These animals are just not that, not that dangerous. Now there is this assumption in Asian countries that the animals have been tamed. Could be so, but would you want to be the one person who finds out that you're wrong or that the animal's having a bad day? So anyway, long story short, my response was in the Facebook group to that post is like, okay, I used to try to explain this to people. I wrote about this. Now I just point them to Nature is Metal, which is an Instagram account, which I highly recommend only adults watch, not children, because it's not suitable for work. And it shows the brutal nature of the animal kingdom and nature in general, but mostly animals, where you can see that how violent they are, how brutal they are, how many, many, many animals die a horrible, slow, and painful death because they are prey to whatever predator is above them in the natural hierarchy. And it's not pretty, and it's pretty gruesome, but that is nature. And if you've been raised by the Disney movies of The Lion King and so on, and you'll see that, it's not, that's the fantasy, but in reality, the circle of life is brutal. It's horrifying. And that is something that I noticed that many people have lost, the understanding of that, okay, you have to respect nature in general and animals in particular. I will never pet a dog that I don't know and the owner is there and he says, it's fine, go ahead. Because you don't know that animal. You may love dogs, but you have no idea who that dog is. One of my clients had a Boerboel, and that's a South African dog, really big boys. I mean, it was like 75 kilos, so that is about 160 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. Really big animal. Here's the thing, it was a very kind animal, very protective of the family, that was all great. However, at the end of his life, he was having joint problems that made it very painful for him. And he snapped and he attacked the vet. Luckily the vet managed to escape the attack, but that could have gone horribly wrong. So this whole life, that dog was awesome, very friendly, very kind, but that one time he almost killed the vet. So if I don't know an animal, I'm staying away from it. I would suggest you do the same, unless you're so good at reading animals that you know how to handle that, and then good for you. But if not, maybe be careful. Here's the thing. All that boils down to not understanding how nature actually works, how the animal kingdom actually is ruled by violence in so many cases. Right? It's the game between predator and prey is the one that is being played constantly. And you don't want to get mixed in between that. No way. Now, and that's why I point to Nature is Metal, the Instagram account, where so many people have no idea of just how brutal it can get. They have the Disney version of animals in their mind. Well, extrapolate that to violence. And then my point is that, okay, well, clearly anything you thought about nature and animals and the animal kingdom was wrong. Okay, well, how does this translate into what you think about violence? Because so many people watch something violent and then they're like, oh no, that was too much, or that guy was way over the top, or that police officer used way too much force. Okay, well, my point that I tried to make was that for a lot of people, any violence is too far. There is no good violence to them. So whatever is happening that they see or see a video of and so on, they react with, well, that's too far for me. That's too much. Now, that brings us back to the original point. of violence rarely, if ever, looks good. And it's very often due to a lack of understanding how violence works that people get this feeling of outrage, that the violence goes way too far. Whereas from my perspective, having studied and experienced this for many decades now, is that what they're watching and what I'm watching is the same incident, but I'm looking at like, yeah, that's fairly general, normal level of violence that we're watching here. Nothing extraordinary. This is kind of run-of-the-mill stuff. But for them, that's way over the line already. Again, because they don't have the experience and knowledge. So the point I want to leave you with, and this is mostly not necessarily for you, the listeners who've been listening to me for a long time, but maybe if you try to bring this idea across to people that are not as much into martial arts and self-defense and so on, is that when people react that way, I would propose ask them this question. Could you please provide me some examples of real-world violence that are good according to your standard of this is too far, this is just stopping shy of that. So ask them for examples like, okay, so clearly for you this is too much, okay, show me an example of quote unquote good violence. Not the bad kind, not the kind that goes too far, but the kind that is actually acceptable according to your opinion. Very quickly, what you get is either a bunch of examples from movies and TV shows, to which I respond, that's not what I asked. I asked real world violence, not fictional stuff, real world. Which is the same thing as what they do then is when I ask examples of violence in the animal kingdom, when they show me a Disney movie. It's like, that's not what I asked. That's not reality. That's fantasy. So when you show whatever fictionalized version of violence, I'm not interested in that. I want you to show me which examples you think are, this is good violence, this is the acceptable level of force or violence used, or the techniques that are used in this case are palatable to me, as opposed to whatever they saw that outraged him. And then very quickly you either get, like I just said, fictional violence, which is disqualified immediately, or silence. And then the next step should be that, well, if you can't find these examples, maybe your perspective needs to be adjusted. Maybe you had this emotional, instinctive response to violence by being horrified, which is not wrong per se, but it is perhaps unrealistic due to lack of understanding, knowledge, and experience by no fault of theirs. But it is something that might be needed to be addressed. So next time you face something like that, I would propose that maybe you try that tactic and see if that helps in making them understand a little bit more about the realities of violence as opposed to the fantasies that many people have in their heads about it. And then maybe they won't need to be as outraged, or maybe they might end up with a little bit more understanding of, despite the violence still looking very bad when you watch it, is that is actually more closer to the norm as opposed to the exception. Right, that's it guys. I am going to call it a day for this episode. So again, you can watch the show notes for some of the links to the stuff that I mentioned here. What's coming up soon? I'm trying to get Lawrence Kane on the podcast. I have some other guests in the works with Lawrence Kane. Obviously, Lawrence written a bunch of books with Chris Wilder, and they've written a new one about martial arts and martial artists, and people who practice self-defense. And it was kind of like a survey, and I was part of that survey, so I filled it in. Really interesting, and it kind of about the idea of who are we, martial artists? What do we do? How do we think? Who are we? A very interesting book. So I'm trying to get him on the podcast. Looks like it's going to work out. We just have to figure out the logistics, and that is something you have to look forward to. All right, today, guys, enjoy the rest of the day. Take care. Again, subscribe, share this video, and so on. Like it if you're watching this on YouTube, and I will talk to you next time.